crime story. Hey there. Thank you for being here and welcome to episode 9 of Tell Me a True Crime Story. I'm your host, Holly. This episode is a week late and I'm so sorry for that. You know, when I decided to do a podcast, I had no idea how much work would be involved and how much time it would actually take to get out each episode. I really underestimated how much work goes into researching, writing, recording, editing, posting, and promoting every single episode of an independent podcast. And I did something really overzealous and started 2 podcasts at almost the same time. I was super busy this past week, and every time I tried to sit down to research and write this story, well, things just happened. I kept getting interrupted and kept losing my train of thought. I couldn't stay focused. So that's my excuse, and I'm so sorry I'm late, but I'm still here, and I'm definitely going to keep putting out episodes consistently. Thank you guys for understanding. I know that you know what it's like to be totally overwhelmed. So thank you so much again for being here, and I hope that you and your family are happy, healthy, and safe. At the beginning of October, I brought you episode 5, Those Who Were Killed While Jogging, with the story of Vanessa Marcotte. This is part 2 of Those Who Were Killed While Jogging. Today, our case comes to you out of rural Iowa. You will definitely see the parallels between this case and the case of Vanessa Marcotte from episode 5. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends and family about it. Follow the podcast on social media. Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok are at Tell Me a True Crime Story, and Twitter is at Tell Me a TCS Pod. Also, please check out my other podcast, All Available Units Respond. So far, there are 3 episodes on there. Thank you again for being here. Big hugs to all of you. Okay, so before we get started, I just wanted to say something real quick. If I ever refer to young women in my episodes as girls, it's definitely not intended to offend anyone. I have children older than and younger than many of the young women in these cases. So to me, they are kids or girls because I'm a lot older than them and it's just a figure of speech. So I feel like I have to give those kinds of disclaimers sometimes because everyone is so sensitive. I don't want anyone to take what I say the wrong way. I'd hate to get canceled before I even become relevant. I definitely mean no disrespect to anyone. Now, let me tell you a true crime story. This story begins a little over 4 years ago in Brooklyn, Iowa, population about 1,500. Brooklyn, Iowa is nicknamed the Community of Flags because of the huge flag display in town featuring flags from all 50 states, the 4 branches of the military, and other flags. The famous actor, the one that was in the Westerns, John Wayne, lived in Brooklyn, Iowa as a kid. A sculpture of his silhouette, a plaque and a rock with his favorite saying, "Howdy, Pilgrim," sit outside of his childhood home located at 717 Jackson Street. The city of Brooklyn got its name in 1854 because it lies between 2 brooks, Big Bear Creek and Little Bear Creek. Brooklyn, Iowa is in Poweshiek County and located about halfway between Des Moines and Cedar Rapids. Poweshiek County is 582 square miles with 340,000 acres of that being farmland. That means that over 90% of the county's land is farmland. The majority of the crops grown in the county are corn and soybeans. And why am I telling you all of this? Well, because I like details, and I figured you might too, or some of you might. And I want you guys to be able to get a feel for the places that we talk about. It helps us to understand the story better if we can envision the atmosphere or environment in which the story takes place. When I was researching and writing this case, I was smiling as I read about Mollie Tibbetts, all that she accomplished in her young life, what a fantastic young woman she was, how special she was to everyone that knew her, her hopes, plans, and dreams for the future. But then I remember how this story ends, and I just feel sick and mad and very, very sad. And I know when I tell you about Mollie, you are going to feel the same exact way. Mollie Cecilia Tibbetts was born in California to Rob and Laura Tibbetts on Friday, May 8th, 1998. Her siblings are older brother Jake and younger brother Scott. Mollie loved books and reading from a very young age. Her dad would read and act out Harry Potter books to her and her brothers each night before bed. Mollie lived in California until the second grade when she moved to Iowa with her mom and brothers after her parents split. In high school, Mollie ran track, was in choir and theater, and was very good in speech and at writing. She was on the speech team for 3 years, and she'd competed at the state level all 3 years. She also wrote poems and enjoyed reading literature, just like her dad. She graduated in 2017 from BGM High School in Brooklyn, Iowa. Mollie was confirmed in the Catholic Church in 2015 and often attended Mass with her grandma Judy at St. Patrick's Catholic Church in Brooklyn. Mollie loved kids and had started babysitting at an early age. At the time of her abduction, she worked at a summer day camp at Unity Point Grinnell Regional Medical Center. It was her second summer working there, and she loved working with the children, according to her co-workers, family, and friends. She was described as being a natural at it. Friends and family of Mollie say she was a social butterfly and that she was sweet, kind, compassionate, and nurturing. That fall, Mollie was to begin her sophomore year at the University of Iowa, where she studied psychology. She wanted to be a child psychologist so that she could help children dealing with mental health issues. Mollie had brown eyes, and at the time of her disappearance, she was 20 years old, had long brown hair, was 5'2" or 5'3", about 120 pounds, with a tan complexion and an athletic build. Since the spring semester had gotten over at the University of Iowa, 20-year-old Mollie returned home to Brooklyn, Iowa for the summer. She stayed at her mom's house and at her boyfriend Dalton Jack's house. On July 18, 2018, she was staying at Dalton's house, where he lived with his brother Blake and his brother's fiancée, Allie. Mollie was staying there dog-sitting while Dalton, Blake, and Allie were out of town. Dalton was out of town doing bridge construction in Dubuque, Iowa, which is a little over a 2-hour drive away from Brooklyn. So this house that I'm talking about, where Mollie was staying with Dalton, Blake, and Allie, is located at 622 West Des Moines Street at the western edge of town. Mollie had been dating her boyfriend, Dalton Jack, for about 3 years. They met in October of 2015 when she was a junior in high school and he was a senior. He called her baby girl and texted her each morning with, "Good morning, beautiful." Since Mollie went to school an hour away from Brooklyn, a lot of their time was spent apart and they kept in touch through text and Snapchat. Before she'd left to attend the University of Iowa in Iowa City, about 50 miles away from Brooklyn, Dalton had given her a promise ring. Dalton stayed back in Brooklyn and worked in construction. During Mollie's first year at college, he made the drive to visit her every weekend and sometimes on weekdays too. Mollie and Dalton were looking forward to an upcoming trip to the Dominican Republic to attend Blake and Allie's wedding. Dalton planned to propose to Mollie on the beach there. He already had the ring hidden in his room. Wednesday, July 18th, 2018. Mollie had had a busy day at the day camp where she worked. She was the one to close up the camp that afternoon and had left work around 5 p.m. Her brother picked her up from work and dropped her off at Dalton's house around 5:30. She'd texted with her mom, Laura, and her mom told her she'd made brats for supper and to come by. In addition to working at the day camp, Mollie was taking summer classes in college and she had homework. But first, Mollie wanted to go for a run. At 7 p.m., it was starting to cool down a bit from the high that day in the low 80s. Mollie laced up her running shoes, put her long brown hair in a low ponytail, put on a pink headband, black spandex shorts, and a bright pink sports bra. She put her cell phone on Do Not Disturb and went out the door for a jog. She wore her cell phone in an armband on her arm. She listened to music through her wireless headphones Dalton had given her as a gift. She headed east through town toward 385th Avenue. Locals call it, quote unquote, the Blacktop. It's where the town turns into farmland, mostly cornfields. Corn in Iowa is harvested in mid-September, and it was only 2 months out from being harvested. So the corn was very tall, 8 feet tall or higher at this time in mid-July. The grass in the ditches on either side of the road was very tall too. This was one of Mollie's favorite routes to run. It was quiet and peaceful, but it's also rural and could be considered desolate. She probably wasn't aware of his presence until he was right on her, but as she ran that evening, he'd been watching her and stalking her. Christina Stewart has owned a hair salon in downtown Brooklyn for about 16 years. Just before 8 p.m. on July 18, 2018, Christina and her 3 kids jumped in her white minivan to make the 5-minute 2-mile drive to her parents' farm where she grew up. They were going to feed the horses and visit with her parents for a bit. She left her house, making a right onto Jackson Street, made another right onto East Des Moines Street, turned left onto Boundary Street, and a quick right onto Middle Street, which turned into 385th Avenue, the Blacktop. Approaching a curve in the road just before her parents' farm, she saw a jogger on her right-hand side jogging east in the same direction she was driving. She recognized the young woman. It was Mollie Tibbetts. She would sometimes cut Mollie's hair or Mollie's mom's hair or her 2 brothers' hair at her hair shop. She carefully and slowly went around Mollie and on to her parents' house. She visited with her parents for about 30 to 45 minutes, then headed home. Christina did not see Mollie jogging back the other direction on the drive back to her house. The next morning, Thursday, July 19, 2018, Mollie was to report to work by 8:30 a.m. The day campers were going on a field trip to the county fair, but Mollie didn't show. She didn't call either or text. That was not like her. Her supervisor, Jill, tried to reach her several times by phone and text, but there was no response from Mollie. Also that morning, Mollie's cousin, Morgan, sent her a Snapchat message commenting about the rain and loud thunder they'd had during the night, but she received no response from Mollie either. This was very strange because Mollie and Morgan were really close and they were almost 2 years into their Snapchat streak, which they both were very proud of. Morgan again messaged Mollie at 1 p.m. and Mollie never opened the message. Some friends and family went to look for Mollie at Dalton's house, but she wasn't there. Mollie was reported missing in the late afternoon on July 19th. Dalton was still working in Dubuque, Iowa, but by that evening, he was getting more and more concerned. His boss let him leave to go back home to Brooklyn. By the time he got home, the group of friends and family gathered at his house had grown. They were planning a search for the next day. The next morning, Friday, July 19th, a massive search began for Mollie. Hundreds of people turned out to help look for her. Volunteers scoured roadways, fields, ditches, and creeks. Some people took their small boats and canoes out to search ponds. Others used their four-wheelers in the hunt, and helicopters searched from above. Police searched houses, outbuildings, barns, garden sheds, garages, rafters of garages, and basements. Posters were given out and plastered everywhere. At the beginning of August, a substantial reward of $172,000 was offered for tips that led to the return of Mollie. Investigators looking into Mollie's cell phone records and cell phone data discovered that from 8:15 p.m. to 8:28 p.m., her cell phone was moving at 10 miles per hour, which is running speed. Then her cell phone stopped moving. It was stationary for about 4 minutes. At 8:32 p.m., her cell phone was suddenly on the move again, but this time at 60 miles per hour and headed south. At 8:53 p.m., her cell phone signal died less than 15 miles southeast of Brooklyn. The area where her cell phone signal died was thoroughly searched, but Mollie nor anything related to the case was found. Investigators learned Mollie's jogging routes and canvassed those areas for security cameras that might show her jogging on the day she disappeared. They had to build a timeline to pinpoint where and when she'd went missing. While canvassing homes in the town of Brooklyn, they discovered cameras on a detached garage at the home of Logan Collins. In 2018, Logan lived at 616 East Des Moines Street. Detectives got the footage from his cameras and focused on the evening of July 18th, when Mollie went missing. They found Mollie on the video. At 7:48 p.m., the security camera caught a quick glimpse of Mollie going by on Boundary Street, which led to the remote road going out of town known as the Blacktop. The detectives then studied the people and vehicles in the security camera footage in that vicinity around that same time. At 7:49 p.m., right after Mollie jogged by, a black Chevy Malibu was seen on camera. The Malibu was on camera driving up and down streets in the same area several different times. The car drove past her and circled back 3 times. The Malibu was unique because it had some distinct features: mag rims and aftermarket chrome mirror covers and chrome door handles. Detectives could not get the license plate of the car from the footage, but they finally had a solid lead in the disappearance of Mollie Tibbetts. They needed to talk to the person driving the black Chevy Malibu. The very next day after investigators saw the Chevy Malibu on security camera footage, which was August 16, 2018, Deputy Sheriff of Poweshiek County, Steve Keevy, spotted a black Chevy Malibu with the same distinct rims, chrome mirrors, and chrome door handles. Deputy Keevy pulled the car over and made contact with the driver. The driver spoke no English, so a nearby resident working in his yard helped Deputy Keevy communicate with the driver of the Malibu. The driver said he was Christian Bahena Rivera. When asked if he knew about the case of the missing Mollie Tibbetts, Bahena Rivera said that he was aware that there was a missing girl from Brooklyn, but didn't know anything more about it. Deputy Keevy said that Bahena Rivera did not seem nervous while they were talking. Bahena Rivera allowed Deputy Keevy to take his picture. Deputy Keevy sent a picture of Bahena Rivera and a picture of his car to the command post. Christian Bahena Rivera was born on June 11, 1994. He speaks Spanish and limited English. He is originally from the southern state of Guerrero in Mexico. His mom, dad, and 2 younger sisters live in Mexico. His dad is a field worker there. Bahena Rivera went to Iowa from Mexico when he was 17 years old with the aid of a coyote. For those who don't know, a coyote is the slang term for someone who smuggles immigrants over the United States-Mexico border for money. Bahena Rivera's uncle helped him find a job within 2 days of arriving in the U.S. His first job was at a dairy farm milking cows, and he worked there for about 2.5 years. After that, he decided to take a job at a different farm, Yerraby Farms, in order to make more money. He made $12.60 an hour at Yerraby Farms. He usually worked at least 12-hour days, sometimes more. He lived in a trailer on the farm like many of the other farm workers at Yerraby. He went by the alias John Budd while working there. A 2018 article on NBCConnecticut.com stated, quote, Lori Chesser, an immigration employment lawyer advising the farm, said that companies cannot discriminate against workers based on how they look or how their names sound. Farm officials have said Rivera presented an out-of-state photo identification and a Social Security number when he was hired in 2014, and they believed he was the person depicted in those documents until his arrest, end quote. When Bahena Rivera was 19, he met a high schooler named Iris Gamboa. They had a child a year later and dated for a total of 4 years. After their breakup, they co-parented without any issues. On August 20th, 2018, Bahena Rivera was brought in to be questioned by authorities. Since Bahena Rivera didn't speak fluent English, investigators had a native Spanish speaker, Officer Pamela Romero, question him about Mollie's disappearance. At the time, Officer Romero was a police officer in Iowa City, Iowa. Bahena Rivera first denied knowing anything about the disappearance of Mollie. Then Officer Romero showed him still images taken from the security camera footage from Logan Collins' residence. This is the footage that showed Mollie running by and him driving his car in the vicinity at the same time. During his 11-hour interview on August 20th and August 21st with Officer Romero, Bahena Rivera told her he passed Mollie running several times as he was making his way to his uncle's home. He said he was going to his uncle's home in Brooklyn to borrow a vacuum cleaner to vacuum his car. He said Mollie even smiled and waved at him, which is something people customarily do in the small town. He told Officer Romero that he found Mollie, quote-unquote, attractive and quote-unquote hot. Bahena Rivera eventually told Officer Romero that the last time he saw Mollie jogging, he decided to park his car about 100 feet behind her. He got out and ran up to her. When she noticed him, she told him she was going to call the police. He told Romero that Mollie tried to slap him and was yelling at him. Bahena Rivera got scared and angry at that, and they began to fight. He told Officer Romero that sometimes when he gets angry, he blacks out. Then, next thing he remembers is driving and looked into his lap and saw Mollie's earbuds. He then remembered that she was in his trunk, but didn't remember putting her in there or how she got there. He drove to a cornfield in a very remote area, took her body out of the trunk, put her body over his shoulder, walked into the corn, and laid her down, face up, amongst the corn stalks. He covered her body with corn leaves and left right away. He said that when he'd removed her body from the trunk, he saw blood on her. He also said as he walked her body into the cornfield, he was not wearing a shirt. He'd taken off his shirt at some point because it was bloody. Bahena Rivera did not provide Officer Romero with a lot of details as to how Mollie was killed or if a weapon was used. When Officer Romero asked Bahena Rivera what he was thinking when everyone was frantically searching for Mollie during that prior month, he told her he just didn't think about it. Just before sunset, Bahena Rivera led officials to a cornfield off of a remote gravel road located at 2468 460th Avenue in Guernsey, Iowa. Mollie's body was deep into the cornfield, almost 500 feet from the road. That's more than the length of a football field, which is 360 feet. I have pictures on my social media that show the area where he left her and in the corn rows where he put her body. When Officer Romero pressed Bahena Rivera for more details surrounding the abduction and murder of Mollie, he just said, quote, "I brought you out here, didn't I?" End quote. Presumably saying that he was able to lead them directly to her body because he's the one that murdered her and put her there. The location where he left Mollie's body is about 12.2 miles away from the intersections of 385th Avenue and 200th Street, the remote area where investigators think Mollie was abducted from. On August 21st, 2018, a little more than a month after she disappeared, Mollie Tibbetts' whereabouts had finally been revealed. Mollie's body was badly decomposed. On her body was her pink sports bra, but it was pushed up like around her neck area. The only other articles of clothing she had on were black socks and her bright-colored running shoes. Her body was positioned with her legs spread apart. Her pink headband, striped underwear, and black spandex shorts were on the ground even deeper into the cornfield. Her autopsy revealed she was stabbed to death. She was stabbed at least 7 times, including a stab to her left cheek and a stab on the right side of her head that penetrated her skull. A crime scene technician processed Bahena Rivera's Chevy Malibu while he was being interviewed by Officer Romero. Blood was found in the trunk. It was later determined to be Mollie's blood. Christian Bahena Rivera was indicted for first-degree murder. He recanted his confession and pleaded not guilty. 6 hours of his interview with Officer Romero, including his confession, was thrown out by the Honorable Judge Joel Yates. This is because when Officer Romero read Bahena Rivera his Miranda rights, she'd made a mistake and omitted a part in the Miranda warning. However, fortunately, Special Agent Trent Valletta of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation made sure Bahena Rivera was read his rights again after he'd led investigators to Mollie's body. Bahena Rivera then made another confession of his guilt right there on the spot. This confession was allowed in court. His trial was in May of 2021, almost 3 years after Mollie was killed. At his trial, he took the stand in his own defense. He'd changed his story and said that 2 armed men kidnapped him and made him participate in the killing of Mollie and the dumping of her body. The jury rejected his story, and after his 2-week trial, he was convicted of first-degree murder. However, his sentencing was delayed because Bahena Rivera's husband and wife defense team came forward and said there was evidence that 2 other local men were involved in Mollie's kidnapping and death. They filed motions to compel new evidence, and they wanted a new trial for their defendant. A hearing was held, and the Honorable Judge Joel Yates ruled that Bahena Rivera was not entitled to a new trial based on the grounds that were argued during the hearing. On Monday, August 30th, 2021, Bahena Rivera was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Mollie Tibbetts. He now resides as Iowa Department of Corrections inmate number 6259386 at the Iowa State Penitentiary in Fort Madison, Iowa. A memorial mass was held for Mollie in her high school gym on August 26, 2018. About 1,500 people were in attendance to share their memories of Mollie and to celebrate her life. Mollie's family created a memorial fund in her memory for child and adolescent psychiatry at the University of Iowa. The fund has received over $165,000 in donations. Mollie's online obituary states that, quote, "What Mollie did best was making friends everywhere she went," end quote. There's a really good documentary on this case. It's a new series by Dateline called The Last Day. Mollie's case is Season 1, Episode 1. It's available on Peacock TV, and it might be available some other places too. I know it's on YouTube, but the quality of that one wasn't that great. So let's talk about safety for a sec. For joggers that are listening, or really for anyone who is out and about, be aware of your surroundings. Ditch the headphones or earbuds so that you can hear everything going on around you, like cars, trains, people approaching, anything. People are getting injured or killed more and more often by getting hit by vehicles or trains while wearing headphones. In 2007 in Pompano Beach, Florida, a 32-year-old woman who was listening to her iPod while jogging had her legs severed by a freight train. In 2011 in North Carolina, a man wearing headphones was hit by a car and killed while walking to work. And in 2018 in Valrico, Florida, a 28-year-old man walked into the path of a train while wearing headphones and was killed. The train was blaring its horn as it approached, but he didn't hear it because of his headphones. And in 2018, as you know, sweet Mollie Tibbetts, wearing earbuds, was caught by surprise when she was approached from behind by Bahena Rivera out in a very rural area where no one was around to help her or hear her screams. Now, something else you should do if you are a regular walker or jogger is to change up your route. Don't be so predictable. You never know who might be watching you and studying your routine and your habits while potentially planning to harm you. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends and family about it. Follow the podcast on social media. Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok are at Tell Me a True Crime Story, and Twitter is at Tell Me a TCS Pod. Also, please check out my other podcast, All Available Units Respond. The podcast covers interesting stories in detail of disasters and catastrophes like structural collapses, massive fires, train derailments, and plane accidents. If you like true crime, I think you will enjoy the stories on that podcast too. And if you have people in your life that are firefighters, police officers, first responders, or retired from any of those professions, I believe that they would like the stories on that podcast. So that podcast is called All Available Units Respond. It's available on, I think, mostly all platforms by now. It should be. And so far, there are 3 episodes on there. So give it a listen. I need some more listeners on that podcast for sure. So help me out with that, please. And I thank you again so much for being here. Tune in next week for episode 10 when I'll tell you another true crime story. Big hugs to all of you. Bye-bye.